You meet someone and there's a spark. The conversation flows differently than it does with other people. She laughs at your observations about things nobody else seems to notice. You text back and forth about some obscure topic at 2 in the morning and it feels electric. You think maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe she gets it. Maybe she gets you. Then somewhere between 3 weeks and 3 months in, something shifts. You can't quite put your finger on when it started, but suddenly the things she found charming now irritate her. The detailed explanations she said she loved now make her eyes glaze over. The spontaneity she claimed to admire now feels like chaos to her. And the worst part is watching her frustration grow, while you're standing there doing the exact same things you've always done, the exact same things that made her interested in the first place. You didn't change. But somehow, everything changed anyway. Here's what's really happening, and nobody wants to talk about it because it makes everyone uncomfortable. Women are attracted to neurodivergent men for very specific reasons that are often completely unconscious. Then they spend the next several months trying to change the exact traits that drew them in, and they do this without even realizing the contradiction. It's not malicious. It's not calculated. But it's predictable, it's painful, and it destroys relationships that could have worked if both people understood what was actually going on beneath the surface. The pattern plays out with such consistency that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And if you're a neurodivergent man who's been through this cycle multiple times, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling of being chosen for who you are, then slowly edited into someone you're not, then blamed when you can't maintain the performance. The attraction phase happens fast and it's intense. She notices that you're different from other men she's dated. You actually listen when she talks about her interests instead of waiting for your turn to speak. You ask questions that show you're genuinely curious about how things work, why people do what they do, what she really thinks about something beyond the surface-level response. You notice details about her that others miss. You remember the offhand comment she made about preferring silver jewelry over gold, about that book she mentioned wanting to read, about the specific way she takes her coffee. Your brain catalogs information about her the same way it catalogs everything else that captures your attention. And to her, this feels like being seen in a way that's rare and valuable. Other guys performed interest to get her into bed. You're actually interested, and the difference is obvious. Your conversation style draws her in because it's substantive. You don't do small talk well, and you never have. But when you talk about things that matter to you, you light up in a way that's magnetic. You explain things with a level of detail and enthusiasm that feels refreshing compared to the surface-level interactions she's used to. You're not performing masculinity the way other men do. You're not constantly posturing or competing or trying to prove something. There's an authenticity to you that feels safe, like you don't have hidden agendas or game-playing strategies. You say what you mean and you mean what you say. And in a dating landscape filled with ambiguity and mixed signals, that directness is like finding water in a desert. She thinks she's found someone real, someone different, someone better than the emotionally unavailable men she's dated before. Your intensity becomes attractive because she interprets it as passion. When you care about something, you really care about it. All in. No half measures. She sees this and thinks it means you'll care about her with that same depth, that same unwavering focus. And you do, in the ways that make sense to you. You think about her constantly. You want to share everything you find interesting with her. You're planning future experiences you could have together based on the patterns of what she enjoys. But here's where the first crack appears. Subtle at first. The way you show care doesn't always match the way she's been taught to recognize care. You might spend hours researching the perfect gift based on something she mentioned once, but forget to send a good morning text because you dove into a project the moment you woke up. You might notice she's stressed and respond by giving her space to decompress because that's what you'd want, while she's waiting for you to ask what's wrong and offer comfort. The care is real. The expression of it just doesn't translate the way she expects. Then there's the novelty factor that nobody talks about honestly. Neurodivergent men are interesting because their brains make unusual connections. You see patterns others don't see. You have knowledge about random topics that seems to come out of nowhere. You approach problems from angles that surprise people. In the beginning, this novelty is exciting. She's never met anyone quite like you. But novelty has a shelf life, and this is where human psychology gets cruel. The brain is wired to habituate to stimuli over time. What was fascinating at 3 weeks becomes normal at 3 months. And once normal sets in, the very traits that seemed exciting start to feel like obstacles to the relationship she thought you were building together. She wanted the interesting conversations and the unique perspective, but she also wanted the relationship to progress in conventional ways, to hit conventional milestones, to feel like the relationships she sees other people having. And your brain doesn't operate on conventional timelines or conventional social scripts. The first major point of friction usually centers around communication. She starts to feel like you don't understand her, which is confusing because you understood her perfectly in the beginning. But what's really happening is that the communication requirements have changed. Early dating is about sharing information, exploring ideas, discovering compatibility. You're exceptional at that kind of communication. It's data exchange and pattern recognition, and your brain loves that. But as relationships deepen, the communication becomes more about emotional regulation, social coordination, and unspoken expectations. She stops saying exactly what she means and starts expecting you to read between the lines, to pick up on subtle shifts in tone or mood, to just know what she needs without her having to spell it out. This is where your literal thinking brain and her indirect communication style start creating persistent misunderstandings. She says she's fine when she's not fine, and you believe her because why wouldn't you? She mentions she'd like to do something sometime, and you think that's a nice idea for the future rather than a hint that she wants to do it this weekend. She sighs or goes quiet, and you don't realize these are signals that she needs something from you emotionally. Your brain is still operating in direct communication mode because that's what worked before. That's what she responded to positively before, and you don't understand why the rules changed without anyone telling you they changed. She's frustrated because she feels like she has to explain everything, and you're frustrated because you wish she would just explain everything. Both of you are right. Both of you are speaking different languages, and neither of you has a translation dictionary. Around this same time, your executive function challenges start becoming visible in ways they weren't before. In the early dating phase, you could hyper-focus on the relationship. Everything else could wait. Bills, laundry, dishes, all of it could be dealt with later because you were channeling all your available energy into this new connection. She saw you as attentive and engaged because you were. But you can't maintain hyper-focus forever. Eventually, real-life responsibilities pile up, and your executive function limitations become apparent. You forget plans you genuinely intended to keep. You lose track of time and show up late. You leave tasks half-finished because you got distracted or overwhelmed by something else. Your living space might be chaos despite your best efforts to keep it together. You struggle to start tasks you know you need to do, sitting there wanting to do them, but unable to bridge the gap between intention and action. To her, this starts to look like you don't care anymore. Like the effort you put in during the beginning was just a performance to win her over. She doesn't see the internal battle. She doesn't see you staring at the task list feeling paralyzed. She doesn't experience the genuine distress you feel when you realize you've forgotten something important again. She sees the external results, the dropped balls and missed commitments, and interprets them through a neurotypical lens where these behaviors indicate low priority and lack of respect. You're putting in maximum effort to keep basic functionality going, and she thinks you've stopped trying. The gap between your internal experience and her external observation becomes a chasm that swallows everything good between you. If you've experienced this, hit that like button, because this pattern needs to be talked about more openly. The misunderstanding here isn't just about individual relationships, it's about fundamental differences in how brains process priority, time, and task execution that most people don't even know exist. Your sensory needs start causing conflict in ways that seem trivial to everyone else. but are absolutely not trivial to you. She wants to go to her friend's party, and you dread it because you know it'll be too loud, too crowded, too much overlapping conversation and social performance required. She wants background music playing while you cook together, and you need silence to focus on not burning dinner. She likes spontaneous changes to plans, and your nervous system needs advance notice to prepare for transitions. She wants to cuddle while watching a movie, and certain types of touch when you're trying to concentrate feel physically overwhelming. None of this makes sense to her because her sensory system doesn't work this way. To her, you're being difficult or antisocial, or rejecting her affection. To you, you're trying to manage genuine neurological responses that aren't under your conscious control. The expectations around social performance become a battlefield. She wants you to come to family dinners and work events and friend gatherings, and you do because you care about her. But the cost of masking through these events is invisible to her. She doesn't see you rehearsing conversation topics beforehand. She doesn't see you monitoring your body language and facial expressions to make sure you're displaying the right emotional responses at the right times. She doesn't see you analyzing every interaction afterward, replaying conversations to figure out if you said something wrong, if you missed a social cue, if people were reacting negatively to you. She doesn't feel the exhaustion that hits you later, the complete depletion that comes from hours of performing neurotypical behavior. She just sees that you seem withdrawn or tired after social events, and she interprets this as you not enjoying time with people who matter to her. Your special interests become a point of contention because she doesn't understand the neurological function they serve. You try to share your enthusiasm about whatever you're currently deep diving into, and she responds politely at first, but eventually tells you that you talk about this one thing too much, that you need other hobbies, that it's not normal to spend this much time and energy on something so specific. What she doesn't understand is that special interests aren't just hobbies for a neurodivergent brain. They're regulation tools. They're how you process the world. They're the thing that makes your brain feel organized and calm when everything else is chaos. They're the area where you can experience competence and mastery when so many other areas of life feel like you're failing constantly. When she asks you to care less about your special interest, she thinks she's asking you to have better balance. What you hear is being asked to give up the thing that keeps you functional. The relationship starts to feel like constant criticism and adjustment requests. She wants you to remember to do certain household tasks without being reminded. She wants you to pick up on her emotional state without her having to explain it. She wants you to be more spontaneous, but also more reliable. She wants you to be more social, but also spend more quality time with just her. She wants you to care less about your interests, but be more passionate about shared couple activities. Every request makes sense from her perspective. Every request feels impossible from yours. You're already operating at maximum capacity just to maintain baseline functioning, and she's asking you to add more things to a system that's already overloaded. You start to feel like you're failing at being a person, and she starts to feel like she's dating someone who refuses to meet her halfway. The thing is, she's not trying to change you maliciously. She genuinely doesn't understand that these aren't choices you're making. She sees behaviors and thinks behavior change is just a matter of deciding to do things differently. She doesn't have the framework to understand that your brain is structured differently, that it processes information differently, that what feels effortless and natural to her might require enormous cognitive resources from you. She thinks she's asking for reasonable things that partners do for each other. She thinks she's communicating her needs clearly. She thinks if you really cared, you'd simply do these things. And you're standing there caring so much it hurts, trying so hard you're exhausted, and still coming up short by her measurements. Here's where it gets really complicated. Some of the traits she's trying to change are actually features, not bugs, but they're features that don't fit conventional relationship templates. Your ability to focus intensely means you might be less available for constant check-ins, but it also means when you commit to something, you commit completely. Your literal communication style means you might miss hints and subtext, but it also means she never has to wonder if you're being honest or playing games. Your need for routine and structure means you might be less flexible about spontaneous plans, but it also means you create stability and predictability in ways that could be incredibly valuable if reframed. Your different emotional processing means you might not respond to her emotions the way she expects, but it also means you bring a different perspective that could be useful if she's willing to see it as different rather than wrong. But seeing features as features requires understanding neurodivergence as a different neurological operating system, not a broken version of the standard one. Most people don't have that understanding. They have the deficit model that's been culturally reinforced, where anything different from neurotypical presentation is automatically categorized as something that needs to be fixed or overcome. She's trying to help you be better, not recognizing that better according to neurotypical standards might mean worse, according to how your brain actually functions. She's trying to optimize the relationship according to templates she's learned from romantic comedies and relationship advice columns and observations of other couples, not recognizing that those templates were built for different neurological configurations. The requests for change escalate because, from her perspective, you're being resistant. She asks you to work on time management, and you try, you really try. But time blindness isn't something you can simply overcome through effort. She asks you to be more emotionally available, and you don't know how to explain that you're already giving everything you have, that you're already constantly monitoring and adjusting and attempting to meet her needs as you understand them. She asks you to be more flexible and spontaneous, and you physically feel your nervous system resist, because flexibility costs you more than it costs her. Every failed attempt at change confirms in her mind that you're not trying hard enough, and every failed attempt confirms in your mind that you're fundamentally inadequate as a partner. Subscribe if you want more truth about neurodivergent relationships, because the conventional relationship advice doesn't account for these differences, and it's destroying connections that could work with the right framework. The rejection sensitivity that's common in neurodivergent brains makes this dynamic exponentially worse. Every piece of feedback feels like confirmation that you're not good enough, that you're too much and not enough all at the same time. Your brain is already primed to scan for rejection signals because you've experienced so much social rejection throughout your life. You've learned that being yourself leads to negative responses, so you've spent years trying to figure out how to be acceptable. And now here's this person you've let in, this person who seemed to accept you, and she's pointing out all the ways you're not meeting standards. Even when she delivers the feedback gently, even when she frames it as being for the good of the relationship, your nervous system interprets it as rejection. You shut down, or you get defensive, or you over-apologize and promise to do better, and none of these responses make things better because they don't address the underlying neurological differences causing the friction. The emotional regulation differences create another layer of misunderstanding. Maybe you process emotions slowly, needing time to figure out what you're feeling before you can talk about it, and she needs immediate emotional connection and resolution. Maybe you experience emotions intensely, but don't show them on your face the way she expects, and she thinks you don't care about things that are actually devastating you internally. Maybe you get overwhelmed and need to withdraw to regulate, and she experiences this withdrawal as abandonment or stonewalling. Maybe you have alexithymia and struggle to identify and name emotions even though you're definitely feeling them, and she needs verbal emotional expression to feel connected. Your emotional world is rich and complex, but the way it operates doesn't match the emotional scripts she's expecting you to follow. The working memory challenges create practical problems that seem like carelessness. She tells you something important, and you genuinely intend to remember it, but the information doesn't stick. You walk into a room to get something and forget what you were looking for. You agree to pick something up on the way home and arrive home empty-handed, not because you didn't care, but because the thought left your mind the moment something else required your attention. She starts writing things down for you, or sending reminder texts. And this helps practically, but emotionally it makes you feel like a child being managed, rather than an equal partner. She feels like she's carrying the mental load of the relationship alone, and you feel like you're constantly disappointing her despite trying to keep track of everything. The gap between your intentions and your execution haunts the relationship. The different social needs create fundamental lifestyle incompatibilities that nobody warned you about. She's extroverted and gets energy from social interaction, needs regular friend time and social outings to feel balanced. You're introverted, or socially exhausted from masking at work all day, need significant alone time to recharge, experience social interaction as depleting rather than energizing. She wants a partner who wants to go places and do things and be seen together in the world. You want a partner who understands that being together at home in comfortable silence is intimacy, that you show love through quality time that doesn't require performance. Neither of these needs is wrong, but they're pulling in opposite directions, and compromise feels impossible because both of you are already giving up essential things about yourselves to be together. Your pattern recognition abilities that seemed charming at first start seeming obsessive. You notice when she's 3 minutes later than usual coming home and you ask about it because patterns matter to your brain and she feels monitored. You remember details about things she said months ago and reference them in current conversations. And instead of feeling seen, she feels like you're keeping score. You notice changes in her routine or behavior and mention them, and she feels like she can't breathe without you analyzing everything. What's happening is that your brain naturally tracks patterns and deviations from patterns. It's just how you process information. But to her, it feels like surveillance. The very trait that made her feel special and noticed now makes her feel trapped and examined. The different processing speeds create communication breakdowns that neither of you knows how to fix. Maybe you need time to formulate responses and she interprets pauses as disinterest or evasiveness. Maybe you process verbally and need to talk through things to understand them and she experiences this as over-explaining or lectures. Maybe you need written communication for important topics because speaking in real time is too demanding, and she feels like you're avoiding real conversation. Maybe your brain moves so fast between topics that she can't follow your logical connections, and she thinks you're being random or not listening. You're both trying to communicate, but you're working with such different processing systems that the message gets garbled in translation. The planning and organization differences create household tension that feels petty, but builds into resentment. She wants shared calendars and meal planning and coordinated schedules. You struggle to plan beyond the immediate future because executive function makes long-term planning genuinely difficult. She wants to discuss and decide things together. You need significant processing time to make decisions and feel pressured when she wants answers immediately. She experiences your difficulty with planning as you not being invested in the future of the relationship. You experience her pressure to plan as overwhelming and anxiety-inducing. The practical logistics of building a shared life together reveal incompatibilities in basic cognitive processes. Here's what makes this pattern so destructive. Both people end up feeling misunderstood and unappreciated. She feels like she's dating someone who won't change, who won't meet her needs, who promised to be one thing and turned out to be another. You feel like you're dating someone who won't accept you, who's constantly critical, who fell in love with a performance you can't maintain. And you're both right. She did fall for someone who seemed different from other men, and then tried to make you more like other men once the novelty wore off. You did show up as your full self initially, and then that full self turned out to be incompatible with her relationship expectations. The tragedy is that neither of you is wrong, but you're neurologically mismatched in ways that require understanding neither of you has. The relationship advice you both get makes everything worse because it's all designed for neurotypical brains in neurotypical relationships. She's told that if he wanted to, he would, which completely ignores executive function disorders. You're told that relationships take work and compromise, which is true, but doesn't account for the fact that what she's asking you to compromise is your neurological functioning. She's told she shouldn't have to nag or remind a grown man to do things, and you're told you need to step up and be more responsible. Both of these pieces of advice assume that memory and task initiation and follow-through are simply choices, and they're not. The advice creates more shame and more pressure and more disconnection because it's addressing the wrong problem. The breaking point usually comes when she decides you're not going to change. She's tried asking nicely. She's tried explaining her needs clearly. She's tried being patient. She's tried getting angry. Nothing works from her perspective because you're still forgetting things and struggling with tasks and needing alone time and being particular about sensory input and all the other things that are fundamentally part of how your brain operates. She interprets your consistency as stubbornness or lack of care. She doesn't understand that you literally cannot neurologically become the partner she's envisioning. And you're exhausted from trying to be someone you're not, from constantly falling short, from the daily experience of your best not being good enough. Drop a comment if you've lived this exact cycle, because understanding this pattern is the first step in breaking it. The saddest part is that many of these relationships could work with the right framework. If she understood neurodivergence not as a list of deficits, but as a different neurological operating system, she could stop trying to change you and start working with who you actually are. If you understood that her needs aren't personal attacks but genuine neurotypical requirements, you could stop taking everything as criticism and start having conversations about actual compatibility. If both of you had language for these differences, you could discuss accommodations and workarounds instead of assigning moral value to neurological traits. If society had better education about neurodivergence in relationships, both of you would enter the relationship with realistic expectations instead of surprise and disappointment. But most people don't have this framework. They have the narrative that love conquers all, that relationships are about finding someone who accepts you as you are, that the right person will make things easy. And then reality hits and reveals that love doesn't conquer neurological differences, that acceptance requires understanding you might not have, that easy is a fantasy when you're trying to merge incompatible operating systems. The relationship doesn't fail because either person is bad or wrong. It fails because you're trying to run incompatible software, and neither of you knows how to write a translation program. The pattern repeats with the next relationship and the one after that because the fundamental issue isn't addressed. She moves on thinking she needs to find a man who's interesting but also conventional, deep but also easy, authentic but also socially skilled. The cognitive dissonance doesn't register because she doesn't realize she's looking for contradictory traits. You move on thinking you need to mask better, try harder, be more normal. Maybe this time you'll get it right. You don't realize yet that the problem isn't your effort level. The problem is that you're trying to fit into a relationship template designed for a different neurotype. Both of you are searching for solutions to the wrong problem. The real solution requires something most people aren't ready for, which is accepting that neurodivergent relationships might need to look different from conventional relationship templates. Maybe scheduled communication times work better than constant texting. Maybe parallel play counts as quality time. Maybe written notes are a legitimate accommodation for working memory issues. Maybe separate bedrooms make sense for sensory needs. Maybe limiting social obligations is healthy boundary setting, not isolation. Maybe special interests deserve protected time, not reduction. Maybe different expressions of affection are equally valid. But accepting this requires letting go of the relationship she imagined. The one that looks like what her friends have. The one that meets conventional milestones in conventional ways. It also requires you to be honest about your limitations instead of promising to change things you can't change. It requires clear communication about what accommodations you need to function, even if those needs seem high maintenance or unreasonable by neurotypical standards. It requires the vulnerability of saying, "This is who I am. This is how my brain works. I can't become someone else no matter how much I care about you." It requires risking rejection by being fully honest instead of trying to be palatable. And that's terrifying when you've spent your whole life learning that being yourself leads to rejection. The cultural narrative about masculinity makes this even harder for neurodivergent men specifically. Men are supposed to be capable and competent and in control. Men are supposed to handle stress without breaking down. Men are supposed to lead and decide and take charge. Men are supposed to not need help or accommodations or understanding. Every executive function challenge, Every sensory overwhelm, every moment of emotional dysregulation, every instance of needing clear communication feels like a failure of masculinity. You're already fighting against your own neurology. You're also fighting against gendered expectations that have no flexibility for neurological differences. The shame compounds because you're not just struggling with relationship compatibility. You're struggling with the feeling that you're not a real man, not a capable man, not the kind of man anyone would want. She's fighting her own conditioning too. Women are taught to be caretakers and emotional managers in relationships. They're taught that a good partner helps their man be better. They're taught that relationships take work, and if things aren't working, they need to try harder. When the relationship struggles, she internalizes it as her failure to support you adequately, to communicate her needs correctly, to be patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough. She's trying to fix the relationship the way she's been taught to fix things, which is by helping you improve. She doesn't realize she's trying to improve things that aren't deficits. She doesn't realize she's fighting against neurology, not behavior choices. The incompatibility becomes clearer over time, but harder to act on because you're both invested. You've built a life together, maybe. You've integrated your friend groups and families. You've made plans and promises. Walking away feels like failure, like giving up, like proof that you're incapable of maintaining a relationship. Staying feels like slow suffocation, like constant inadequacy, like betraying yourself to maintain a performance that's killing you. There's no good option because the fundamental issue, the neurological mismatch, isn't solvable through effort or love or commitment. It's a structural incompatibility that exists regardless of how much you care about each other. Some couples find ways through this. Usually it requires both people doing significant education about neurodivergence and unlearning harmful assumptions. It requires her accepting that different doesn't mean less than, that accommodation isn't the same as lowering standards, that the relationship might need to be structured in unconventional ways. It requires you accepting that your needs are legitimate, that asking for accommodations isn't weakness, that you deserve a partner who works with your neurology instead of against it. It requires both of you grieving the relationship you thought you'd have and building something new based on who you actually are, rather than who you wish you were. Most couples don't make it through this process because it's hard, and it requires resources and knowledge most people don't have access to. The couples who do make it through usually report that the relationship becomes more authentic and sustainable once they stop fighting against reality. When she stops trying to change you and starts working with your actual brain, the constant criticism stops. When you stop trying to be someone you're not and start advocating for what you actually need, the exhaustion and resentment decrease. When both of you accept that the relationship will look different from what either of you imagined, you can build something that actually works instead of trying to force compatibility that isn't there. But getting to that point requires pain and honesty, and the willingness to potentially lose the relationship in the process of saving it. For relationships that don't make it, understanding this pattern at least provides context for why things fell apart. It wasn't because you're fundamentally unlovable or incapable of relationships. It wasn't because she's shallow or uncaring or intolerant. It was because you were trying to merge incompatible operating systems without the knowledge or tools to create actual compatibility. The relationship failed, but that failure contains information about what you need in future relationships. You need someone who understands neurodivergence before you start dating, or who's willing to learn early and adapt continuously. You need someone whose natural relationship style is already compatible with your brain's requirements, not someone who needs you to change fundamental things about yourself. You need to be honest about your limitations from the beginning, instead of hoping love will make them not matter. The pattern of being chosen for your differences, then criticized for those same differences, will keep repeating until you find someone who genuinely wants those differences, who sees them as features, rather than bugs requiring patches. That person might be another neurodivergent individual who shares your neurotype and understands these experiences from the inside. That person might be a neurotypical individual who's done the work to understand neurological differences and doesn't need you to perform neurotypical behavior to deserve love. That person might not exist, which is a possibility you have to hold space for. Not because you're unlovable, but because genuine compatibility is rare and neurological compatibility is even rarer. What you can't do is keep entering relationships hoping this time you'll be able to maintain the mask long enough for love to make your neurology not matter. It will always matter. Your brain will always work the way it works. The executive function challenges and sensory needs and communication differences and all the rest will always be there. You can develop better coping strategies and support systems. You can learn to advocate for yourself more effectively. You can build a life that accommodates your needs instead of fighting against them. But you can't become neurotypical, and relationships built on the assumption that you will or should become neurotypical are doomed from the start. The women who push away neurodivergent men often don't realize they're doing it. They think they're asking for reasonable things. They think they're trying to help. They think if you really cared, these changes would be possible. They don't have the framework to understand that they're asking you to be someone you're neurologically not built to be. They don't see the violence of their kindness, the way their help feels like rejection, the way their patience is actually a countdown to the inevitable moment when patience runs out. They're operating from their own pain and confusion and unmet needs, trying to save a relationship that's drowning, not understanding that the life preserver they're throwing is designed for a different kind of swimmer. And you're trying so hard to grab that life preserver, to be saved by it, to prove that you can change enough to deserve staying in the relationship. You're pushing yourself past your limits. You're masking until you're depleted. You're promising to do better and trying to do better, and breaking yourself against the reality that better, according to her standards, means worse according to your actual functioning. You're wondering what's wrong with you that you can't just do these simple things that seem to come easily to everyone else. You're forgetting that everyone else has a different brain. That simple for them isn't simple for you. That you're not failing at being a person. You're succeeding at being yourself in a world that punishes deviation from standard. This is the truth about why these relationships fail. Not because either person is bad. Not because the attraction wasn't real. Not because the connection wasn't genuine, but because connection without understanding is just the first chapter, and the rest of the story requires both people to see and accept reality instead of fighting against it. Most people aren't ready for that level of reality. Most people want love to be enough. Most people believe that differences can be overcome through effort and compromise, and for some differences that's true. But neurological differences aren't preferences or habits or choices. They're the fundamental architecture of how you process reality itself. You can't compromise your way out of that.